Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing dialogue about American origins and evolving institutions. The executive director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He is also your host for this conversation. And now, here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Kincaid, and welcome. This is Bill O'Brien, and it is an absolute pleasure to be back with you again here on a beautiful Tuesday. In September, we have reached the fall of the year. We're anticipating getting some weather here in southern Virginia that's going to be a little bit more fall-like than we've had in the last several days, with temperatures in the low 80s and high humidity and thunder showers periodically and all of that. It looks like the weather, but not just here. From what I gather, it's going to be the entire eastern part of the country is going to experience a little bit cooler and drier weather for the next 5 or 6 days in a row. So I'm looking forward to it. This is here the most absolutely beautiful time of the year, I think. Everybody says that, and I can see why. The only thing that puts a damper on it, of course, is what lies ahead. And like everybody else, you kind of hope it'll be a mild winter, although others are basically suggesting that this one could be a doozy, but I don't know quite how they know that. My wife, of course, is born here in West Virginia, and she says the best way to predict the weather is with the woolly worms, the color of the woolly worms, the color of their fur pretty much is an indication of what the winter is going to be like. I don't know about that. But on the other hand, I don't know enough to refute it either. So I find it much easier to keep peace in the house by kind of going along with it. And since I don't have an alternative, it's pretty easy. It is a pleasure to be with you. It seems like forever that since we've been together here at the Virtual Center. In listening to Bob's introduction to today's program, the Virtual Center, and of course it's this pretty introduction each day. But I was struck by his mention of the word dialogue and his use of the word conversation, and I kind of thinking about the phone number and hope that one or more of you will take the opportunity to people hear a voice besides mine exclusively here at the 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. If you would like to email me directly, I would love to hear from you. I will respond in kind. I promise you that. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. All one word, waobrien, 906@gmail.com. I feel like I kind of have to set the stage when we begin a new week. Of course, yesterday was a holiday, so we didn't have a program. So actually, here on Tuesday, this would be our second program this week, but this week it's our first. So it's an extra day since we've been together here at the Virtual Center on for the last time. So since the last time, so. I want to kind of bring you a little bit up to date on a couple of things, and a little bit about my personal situation. I was kind of excited today because I began a new season here in West Virginia with the Beckley Shepherd Center. Some of you may know that the Shepherd Center is an organization comprised principally of senior citizens, and it's a social group that meets here on Tuesdays once a week, and they have classes and they do crafts and music and sing and those kinds of things, and then they share a wonderful lunch together. And I've been actually in, I believe, 1993. was connected to the Shepherd Center here in Beckley, and I started to do a weekly class at the Shepherd Center in the time slot, 1 hour in the morning, and it was listed as their life enrichment class. I was a little bit intimidated by the title because I wasn't sure how much enrichment I was going to be able to bring to anybody's life. But it was an opportunity to interact with them and to bring news items. And, I've always been kind of a junkie when it comes to public affairs and politics and community issues and those kinds of things. So an opportunity to come together with some people who have lived their lives and contributed so much to the community. It was an opportunity for me that I really couldn't turn down. With a couple of years exception, when my wife Joan died in the year 2002 at Christmas time. So that year and the following year, I didn't teach the class at the Shepherd Center, but the year after that, 2004, I went back and joined them. They begin their session the Tuesday after Labor Day, and they end with a group picnic, and I just love it. So with the exception of 2 years, a year and a half, been pretty much teaching class with this group for better than 20 years, about 20 years, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I enjoy them, but as you can tell, as you can tell by the title, one of the things that creates a problem with a group like the Shepherd Center is, unfortunately, we keep losing members, and it's very, very difficult to recruit new folks. We get a few every year, but bottom line is, it's an organization that is difficult to sustain. I can remember when I was involved in the mid-'90s, the group used to be about 80 or 90 people. My class I would have anywhere from 25 to 40 people every Tuesday in my class, and it was really a challenge to try to lead a discussion with many folks. But like any group, certain people talk a lot, and other people don't talk that much, but get a lot out of listening and just reflecting on the ideas and the points of view that they hear or whatever. The reason I mentioned the size of the class because today my class had 9 people, and the contrast from in the last 15 years is incredible. And one of the things I realized when I did go to class this morning for the first meeting of the year, we lost 2 people this summer from the group. Both of them wonderful, wonderful people and people that I consider to be good friends. One of them was a lady that is local here in Beckley. The reason that I am sharing this with you is because Catherine, her name was Catherine Williams, went to school with Senator Robert C. Byrd here in southern West Virginia. He was from the county, from Raleigh County, where we're broadcasting from, and Catherine was a schoolmate of his, and so they were friends throughout his entire life, from the time they were children. And Catherine used to tell us about, she remembers when Senator Byrd, before he was senator, met his wife Irma. She used to talk about them courting when they were in their late teens. And, of course, Irma died before Senator Byrd did. Senator Byrd died about a couple of years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago. And Irma died three or 4 years before that. And the Higher Education Center here in Beckley, which houses and university classes, is after Irma Byrd. And I can remember in 2007, 2008, when the building was dedicated and Senator Byrd was here for the dedication. I can remember him choking up because it was one of the, he's had so many, in his career, he had so many things here in West Virginia named after him. But it's not that often that a building or a facility as important as a higher education center was named after his wife Irma, and I can remember him being really, really choked up and moved by the experience. Anyway, one of the people that we lost this summer from the Shepherd Center is Catherine Williams, and I considered her a friend. I've known her for better than 20 years. And then one of the other people there I didn't know long, but it was a gentleman, and he became a good friend. I used to drink coffee with him on Tuesday mornings all the time. He was kind of the person that collected the money when people come. He would basically collect the $3 or $4, whatever it is, that the members pay for their lunch. And I noticed today when I showed up that he wasn't sitting at the table where he usually is, and I didn't have my coffee buddy. And, of course, after I got my coffee and sat down and started to interact with people, I learned why Hubert was not there. And he passed away on the 20th of July this summer, just a little bit more than a month ago. And that's one of the difficulties of being involved with a group like the Shepherd Center. But at the same time, it's just a wonderful experience. It's become a major part of my life. And because I spend so much time here on the air at the Virtual Center, I wanted to share a little bit of that with you, in part because I think the more you know about me, the more comfortable you'll be, and the more we can interact with the business at hand, which is the Virtual Center. So again, let me repeat the phone number. It is area code 304, and the number is 658-3333. We would love to hear from you on the issues of the day, or what we're talking about, or if you would like to introduce a new issue, by all means, feel free to do that. We would thoroughly enjoy hearing from you, and I commit to that. We'll be kind of beginning a new topic. We finished with last week. We finished with Cleon Skousen's 28 principles in his 5,000-year leap, and we talked a little bit about. I was sharing it with the Shepherd Center group this morning about the number of sessions. We spent 3 or 4 of our days here together talking about those 28 principles, because it seems to me there's quite a bit of substance there to talk about. And the group was very interested. Not one person in there was familiar with Cleon Skousen's book, the 5,000-year leap, but they were a little bit impressed, and a few of them were a little, perked up an ear when I mentioned Glenn Beck, because when Glenn Beck says that much of his political ideology is tied to those 28 principles, that got a little bit of attention. So one of the things I promised them is that we would look at those 28 principles as part of this year. And so this is one of the first examples where what I cover in the class will be something that we've already covered here at the Virtual Center. But one of the things that we were talking about this morning with the senior citizens, and of course one of the things that has happened to me is that in the course of being involved with the Shepherd Center over the last 20 years, I've become one of a senior citizen myself. And so I consider myself one of them, rather than just an instructor. And, of course, they are such wonderful people that they made me and my wife, Joan, and now my current wife, Wilma, feel very comfortable and at home anyway. So I felt like one of them from the very beginning. It's a wonderful teaching situation when you are so comfortable and you feel like you've been so accepted by a group, and create that kind of interaction. And of course, there's no grading and no red pen and no threat, and no power relationships or anything else within the group. It's just an opportunity to share ideas and throw ideas on the table, and everybody jumps on them and chews them up, and we see what happens. And that's kind of what I'm hoping the Virtual Center will become in time here as well. But one of the things we were talking about in Shepherd Center today, and actually I raised the issue because it was something that I thought we ought to spend at least a day investigating or pursuing a little bit, is the whole concept of community. I was sharing with them programs that we've done here during the summer on the idea of the commons and the idea of community and the role of government and the extent to which government represents the interests of community versus the individual interests of the people within the community. And we were kind of talking around that issue a little bit. So one of the things that caused me to raise it today at all was that I had been thinking over the long weekend that the issue of community is one that we really need to spend a little bit of time with here at the Virtual Center. And the reason I say that is because if you think about it, we did talk about the commons quite a bit. We talked about John Locke, and we talked about John Locke's recognition of the idea of community in his second treatise on civil government as well as his first treatise. And while most of the emphasis on John Locke is placed on his idea of individual freedom and the right to acquire and be secure in one's private property, the fact of the matter is Locke never really lost sight of the idea of community. It's not only his state of not necessarily in his mind a place where individuals existed as individuals. John Locke was very familiar with the ancients. He was very familiar with Aristotle and the whole idea of man being a political animal. And if you remember, we talked about that last time in terms of the emphasis on community versus the emphasis on the individual. And that's really what sparked me at the end of the program last time. I kind of thought that it, and one of the things that I will be doing in class, I'm teaching a college class here in southern West Virginia, as you know, for the University of Charleston. And this is one of the things that I'm dealing with, that I'm going with in class, is the idea of community. And they have in their hands over the weekend a couple of documents. And I thought that I would share a couple of those documents with you, and that we would kind of get our arms a little bit more completely than perhaps we have around the idea of community. It's one of those terms that we throw out there, we talk about it. I've made reference numerous times to the preamble to the Constitution and about government's role of promoting the general welfare. And if you remember, when we looked at Theodore Roosevelt's New Nationalism speeches in 1910, he talked about community as well, and he talked about government's responsibility to govern, to manage, or to legislate for the entire community, not merely for individuals within it. And, of course, what he was identifying there was the natural conflict, if you will, between the interests of the group and the interests of individuals. And one of the things that I was sharing with him, that I was sharing today with the Shepherd Center, was a Supreme Court case which we will be dealing with here at the Virtual Center. And I've had it on my agenda, but, you know, one thing leads to another, whatever, and we haven't done it yet. But there's a very famous, well, I don't know how famous it is. Let me go back. There's a very prominent, I think one of the most significant court cases, Supreme Court, is in the history of the court. That was, the decision was rendered in 1837 under the Supreme Court. At that time, the Chief Justice was Roger B. Taney. And Roger B. Taney replaced John Marshall as Chief Justice. John Marshall passed away in 1836. And he was replaced as Chief Justice by Justice Taney. And politically, we were very, very familiar, I think all of us, about with the political squabbles and the fights that usually emerge over the appointment of Supreme Court justices. And there was an extensive interview in the New York Times not this past week, but the week before, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And one of the questions that the interviewer was focusing on was whether, in fact, she was contemplating leaving the court and retiring, because that would create an appointment opportunity for President Obama, and that in turn would kick off a political squabble, as we know. And the interviewer made reference to the fact that in recent years, Justice Ginsburg had health issues. She is in her 80s, and so the thinking was that she might be contemplating retirement. And in this extensive interview, she made the point that retirement is not in her game plan. In fact, she said that many of the health issues which had caused problems before have seemingly resolved themselves, at least for time. And she said that right now she feels that her health is better than it's been in several years. She feels, as she has all the way through, that she has remained as sharp as a tack intellectually. And she feels that she has a contribution to make on the court, and she intends to continue to make it. So it looks like that particular seat on the Supreme Court is not one that we will be fighting over in the very near future. But there are others. As you know, the justices are very old, and many of them. And so as important as Supreme Court justices are, we know that they become political footballs once they open up. We remember the confirmation hearings associated with Clarence Thomas, obviously, if you remember that one. But recent ones, John Roberts and Justice Alito, the two most recent appointees to the Supreme Court, and how they become really political issues. And of course, you remember the tremendous hostility that was associated with the nomination of Robert Bork and the role that Senator Kennedy played in Bork's not being confirmed. Many people believe that, as much as anything else, sparked a conservative reaction, which we are. But the whole seems to me revolves around the rights of the individual as opposed to the rights of community. And of course, what we're talking about here are not only the rights of individuals as individuals, but also the responsibilities of individuals as member of a community, and the role of government in representing everybody, not just some, and representing the whole idea in the preamble of promoting the general welfare suggests that government's priority responsibility is constantly to look at what the best interests of the general population are. And I mentioned moments ago about the 1837 decision of the Taney Court in the case of Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge. And we will go into this in more detail at some point in time. But the point I wanted to make here was that in that decision, in that case, the issue of the individual versus community came to a head, became a major issue in the decision. And very honestly, what happened in that decision was that the Supreme Court threw its weight in that decision on the side of the public interest as opposed to the rights of private interest or the rights of the individual. In this case, it was a corporation, Harvard University. Harvard University had been granted a monopoly by the state of Massachusetts to build a bridge across the Charles River connecting Cambridge, city of Cambridge, with the city of Boston. And the idea is that the creation of the bridge would expedite and promote economic development in the entire region. Up until that point in time, most of the communication across the Charles River was by ferry, by boat. And so the thinking was that economic development in the entire Boston area would be enhanced with the construction of a bridge. Harvard University agreed to put up the capital necessary to build the bridge. The state of Massachusetts endorsed the venture, and not only that, but gave Harvard University a perpetual monopoly on the toll traffic across that bridge. The bridge was to be a toll bridge, and Harvard University. Every year, a portion of the tolls taken from that bridge. Effectively, Harvard University was given a monopoly of the traffic between Cambridge and Boston that was expedited as a result of the construction of that bridge. The point is that that was the initial rendering of the courts. But by the 1830s, the monopoly that Harvard University enjoyed was called into question, because the bridge had been so successful and economic development had grown to such an extent that suddenly one bridge inhibited economic growth rather than promoted it. The construction of a bridge was designed to promote economic development. So successful did it become that there was enough business for two bridges. But a monopoly had been granted to the first by the state of Massachusetts. Well, lo and behold, a second bridge is constructed across the Charles River. Warren Bridge Company builds a bridge 600 yards from the first bridge. And naturally, the owners of the first bridge, in possession of a contract from the state of Massachusetts granting them a monopoly of traffic, seeks relief in court. And it ultimately goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court is confronted with a choice between the initial monopoly granted to the first bridge company, Charles River Bridge Company, underwritten by Harvard University, versus the public interest, which seemed to demand the construction of a separate bridge, of a second bridge. And so Warren Bridge was constructed, was built. But unlike the first, the Warren Bridge was free. There were no tolls. There were tolls assessed for only 6 years, the idea being that in 6 years the cost of the construction of the bridge would be paid for, and at the end of 6 years the bridge would become a full. Naturally, the proprietors of the first bridge came to court, because if there's a free bridge 600 yards from their bridge, clearly nobody's going to pay the toll when they can go 600 yards down the road and go across the river with no toll at all. So effectively, the construction of a toll-free bridge 600 yards from the initial bridge would effectively put the Charles River Bridge Company out of business. And the case came before the Supreme Court in the person of Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. And Taney's decision was that the government's principal responsibility is the public interest. And basically what he was suggesting is the definition of the public interest changed from the construction of the first bridge to the construction of the second bridge. Initially, economic development, the public interest would be enhanced with the construction of a bridge. So the state of Massachusetts was within its governing function, in its legal rights, to grant a monopoly to those who would build the bridge in order to get the bridge. It was a win for the company. It was a win for the community. However, the successful economic development which ensued suddenly created a situation where the public interest was being stifled by that monopoly, because there was enough business for two bridges, but in a sense the monopoly inhibited the building of the second. So the court's decision was, does the initial contract with the first company take precedence over the state of Massachusetts granting of the right and bridge company to build a bridge, or does the state's commitment to promote the public interest outweigh the monopoly granted to the first bridge company? And the court found in favor of Warren Bridge, in favor of the state of Massachusetts, and said that the state was within its constitutional right to void the contract in its responsibility to promote the public interest, the general welfare. I shared with, I shared with senior citizens this morning in the Shepherd Center, because telling that story, that's the second time today I've told it, telling that story brought me back to the first time I heard that story. I was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin in a constitutional history class taught by Stanley Cutler. Dr. Stanley Cutler has become a fast friend. We have stayed in touch through all of these years. Dr. Cutler is now in his late 80s. But he made 2 appearances here in southern West Virginia as part of grant programs that I've been doing over the last 10 years. And I consider him to be one of the most thoughtful and insightful constitutional scholars that I've ever come across. I was sitting in his class when he made us aware that he had written a book on the case of Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge. And I can remember thinking, my first year in graduate school, I can remember, what in the name of God would anybody care about a Supreme Court decision between 2 bridge companies? And I can remember sitting in his class absolutely spellbound when he relayed the story of Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge. And I can remember thinking, when I left that class that day, this just might be the most important Supreme Court decision I've ever heard of. So a question that I had is, why hadn't I heard of it? For me, my understanding of community and the idea of promoting the public interest and the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, everything came together for me as a result of that class that day. And it was one of those aha moments that all of us hope to have. Some of us, I think every one of us has had at least one of those aha moments where suddenly things make sense that didn't make sense before. For me, I was absolutely astounded, and I ever since then, and my whole attitude towards that course, my interest in the Constitution, everything that I became as a student after that day was contingent on that particular lecture on Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge. Now, I've told Stanley Cutler more than once since then that class, that book, was probably, as much as anything else, changed my life, at least my professional life. It was, for me, one of those aha moments. But what it did for me was, that's the point at which I began to understand the nature of what a living constitution. The idea that circumstances changed. What was the public interest in the late 18th century and early 19th century was no longer the public interest once we got 35 years into the 19th century. The definition of the public interest changed, and consequently the interpretation of the Constitution changed accordingly with it. For me, it was an eye-opener. And very honestly, that's part of the reason why I'm sharing that story with you today. I think Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge is one of the most important decisions, Supreme Court decisions, if for no reason that it lays out very, very clearly the idea that as time changes, the Constitution and necessarily must change with it. And those scholars, constitutional scholars, who admire the life of our Constitution point to the fact that the reason the Constitution has survived this long with as few changes as there have been in it is in part because of the wisdom of the who were seemingly able to anticipate the fact that in order for a Constitution to remain relevant, it must contain what it has to have in order to remain flexible and relevant. It must be able to change. And that definition of the public interest and how it changed for me was an eye-opener. And that whole story reinforced for me the issue of community and how very, very important it is to understand community. We throw the word around. Sociologists throw it around all the time. People use the term, the concept of community, the theory of community. I think it's very, very important for us to understand the nature of community and what it involves. So what I pretty much thought about today on today's program, and we've gone beyond the bottom of our first hour, is that I have relatively short documents, historical documents, which seem to me to provide some insight into the nature of community, which for me have allowed me to grasp the concept. And I really think that that's what we're about here, because, as you know, so many people in our political squabbles, in our ideological debates today between conservatives and liberals, will talk about the public interest and the community interest, and will debate the two as to whether the priority of the individual should take precedence over the priority of the group or vice versa. One of the people in Shepherd Center this morning raised the issue, which I thought was very insightful, raised the issue of the idea of eminent domain and how government in the public interest will take a piece of private property on the basis of the fact that that property stands to benefit the public interest more than it is currently benefiting its private owner. And so the idea in government, in constitutional law, is the idea that if all the stars line up properly, in other words, if the circumstances are appropriate, and government is able to support or promote the public interest by taking a particular piece of property, it has the right to do that, provided it awards fair and just compensation to the owner. And as we know today, there have been a number of cases that have come up in the media where there's some suggestion that in certain cases the power of eminent domain has been abused in certain regions. And I'm thinking specifically of property being seized to build shopping malls and things like that, where private homes are being demolished in the interests of a parking lot. I can remember, in fact, where I'm sitting right now, if I look out there is, within eyesight through my window, there is what my wife Joan used to refer to this as a glass monstrosity. This large 5-story glass building here in town that is an office building, and the reason we notice it because it seems like there's always 1 or 2 suites in it for rent. It never seems to be full, which speaks to the issue of the business climate here in West Virginia generally. Of course, that's one issue. But folks that I've known in town here have told me that some of the beautiful old homes that used to exist here and were demolished in order to build that building. And the idea is that the city of Beckley and the economy of Beckley and the people of Beckley could not survive without the construction of that building lot that serves it. And the result is that 4 or 5 beautiful homes were sacrificed in the process to build that thing. It probably, my guess is that it was probably built in the 50s or 60s, maybe 19s. It's probably about a half a century old now. But some of the folks who have been in town for a long time have made comment and said you should have seen the beautiful homes that were taken so that we could get that thing. And the case was made that we needed it, the economy needed it, the people of Beckley needed it, and all the rest of it. Fact of the matter is, once you demolish a dwelling, a home, it becomes, you can't put. It's a decision that has an element of permanency to it, which sometimes is frightening. Anyway, so the issue of the public interest, the issue of community. I have 3 documents that I'd like to share with you, and they're all from the colonial period in American history. One of them I'm sure everybody's heard of. It's famous. It's called the Mayflower Compact. The second is from colonial Massachusetts as well. It's called the Dorchester Agreement. And one of the reasons I like the Dorchester Agreement is because I've lived in Dorchester, which is south of the city of Boston, but it's still, Dorchester is one of the boroughs or one of the communities within the parameters within the city of Boston itself. And I lived there and went to school there and various things. And the third document, once again, from the Massachusetts experience during the colonial period, is another one that I'm sure you've heard of. It's John Winthrop's famous City Upon a Hill speech, which he delivered on the ship when the Puritans were on the way over across the Atlantic in 1630. And Winthrop, who was a minister and the first governor of the colony, issued this, delivered this sermon aboard the Arbella and explained to the people on board what they were about and what they were doing. This speech is so important for so many different reasons. There are 2 or 3 major themes, major issues within this document. One of them is the idea of community. So we're at almost at 45 minutes after the hour, so we've got 15 minutes left in this, our first hour. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to take the Mayflower Compact first because it's brief. And then once we look at the Mayflower Compact, look at the Dorchester Agreement, and then we can finish our second hour with John Winthrop's famous City Upon a Hill speech. I think these are incredibly important, not only because of what they say, but for the concepts that become so much a part of Americana and our constitutional system as a result of these concepts. They are absolutely critical to know. And I basically will feel a lot more comfortable for having done this, because I think when we talk about community and the public interest in the future, people will have, hopefully, a much clearer idea as to what it is we're talking about. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to share with you, if you haven't seen it yourself, and if you go online, if you're sitting near a computer right now, you can go on Google, or I'm guessing that if you just look in your browser, in Explorer, Microsoft Explorer, just type in the Mayflower Compact, and you'll find a copy of this document. It's famous. It appears in many, many books, many textbooks, many courses. I want you to basically experience the entire document, because most people have come across the Mayflower Compact in textbooks, where the author of the textbooks has told them what the Mayflower Compact does. but it means so much more when you read the document for yourself, and that's part of what we're about here at the Virtual Center. So with that introduction, let's go. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. Notice, Massachusetts, the northern parts of Virginia. Do by these presents, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, period. It's very difficult when you're listening to this. A lot of it depends on my ability to read it effectively. So let me, if I can, repeat it again. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. They create a political community. The only way that you can do that is by consent, where the power of this document comes from is the fact that the people who comprise the community agree together. They reach agreement that they will create a civil body politic. And the next section of the document will say, and they agree to abide by and live according to the rules made, the laws passed by this civil body politic. There are several things that I wanted to, in that sentence, that I wanted to make reference to. First, notice the extent to which the architects of the Mayflower Compact pay homage to the King, King James the First. They also point out that there are three benefits or three objectives to this trip, to this voyage that they are taking. The glory of God, advancement of the Christian faith. They are affirming their loyalty to the King and to England. They do not claim to be abandoning the country. They are affirming their loyalty to their king, to their country, and to their God. A piece of history here. The fact of the matter is, this particular group of settlers, this is the group that history refers to, we know as the Pilgrims. This is not the group that goes to Boston in 1630 under Governor Winthrop. This is the group that goes to Plymouth on Cape Cod And the name that most of the books associated with this are the names of Miles Standish and Governor Bradford. Some of you remember those names from your early history. The fact of the matter is, these particular people are, within their own religion, they are Congregationalists. We call them Puritans, but effectively, for purposes of identifying what Puritans are, these are Congregationalists. The fact of the matter is, they are separating from the Church of England. They consider themselves separatists. These are the people that leave England and went to Holland in order to worship God the way they wanted, and they kept moving around until finally they make the decision to go all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and settle in the New World. Their goal is to set up their godly community the way they want, which is not the way the Church of England wants. So historically, the difference between this group and the Boston group is that this group historically has been identified as what the textbooks call separatists, because they are effectively separating from the Church of England. And you're probably saying to yourself, but the document doesn't say that. The fact of the matter is they can't say that, because if they said that, the king would revoke their charter. The only way that they can maintain their charter and pursue their mission is if Mother England believes that they remain loyal subjects of the king and loyal members of the king's church, the Church of England. Remember, the Protestant Reformation in England maintains the ceremonies of the Catholic Church, but the difference is the King of England is now the head of the church in England, not the Pope. So the only way that they can pursue their mission is if they are able to successfully sell this idea that they are not separatists, but in fact they are. That's just a point of information. But in effect, what I'm suggesting to you here is that even though they say they are not, the fact is that they are. So anyway, they combine themselves, and the use of the word covenant. They agree among themselves. They all agree to this covenant, which a covenant is a religious term which effectively means contract. They contract with each other. Within this one sentence, it seems to me, we can see the idea of participatory government. We can see the idea that the only way a contract or a covenant can remain valid is if the people consent to it. The idea of consent of the government. Government's power comes from the power that the people who create it are willing to give it. So much of our political system finds its beginnings right here in this one sentence. So they create together a civil body politic. And then they give reasons for it. For our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid. So we covenant and we combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid. The reason we are doing this is to accomplish the mission which we have identified above, the glory of God, advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor to our king and country. So that's part of the reason that we create this civil body politic. And the other reason is it better orders us and ensures our preservation. Fact of the matter is, these people realize that they are a minority in their own boat, on their own ship. And if they don't seize the initiative and make the rules, then somebody else is going to have to make the rules for them. So given their mission and given what they're about and why they're doing this in the first place, they feel bound to seize the initiative and create the civil body politic. And then they go on and they explain what they have done. And by virtue hereof do enact. And by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony. There's the public interest. By creating a civil body politic, creating ourselves into a political community, and putting our names on a piece of paper, covenanting, contracting with each other to do it, thereby we enact, constitute, and frame such just and equals laws, ordinances, acts, and constitutions, and officers from time to time, it shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony. Notice, the goal is the general good of the colony, not the individual rights of the individuals to the covenant. The emphasis is on the group, on the body politic, not on the people who comprise it. This, of course, is a major difference that we're going to see later on as a result of the Constitution and the emphasis on individualism and individual freedom. Unto which, it goes on, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. We agree that we will live according to, we will submit to and obey the laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers created by the civil body politic that has been created for the general good of the colony. We agree to obey. They have created a political unit. They have created a political community. And then they sign it. Excuse me, and they say at the very end, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience, in witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland the 54th, Anno Domino 1620, the year of our Lord 1620. They put their names to this document. They are establishing, before they've set foot on the soil of the New World, they are establishing the idea that government only derives its power from the consent of the governed. The only way that people can be forced to obey the law is if they have some role in the making of that law. And that's what the civil body politic is. And the laws, the constitutions, the officers, all of those things are primarily geared for the convenience and good of the colony, not to protect the private interests or the private rights of the citizens within it. The assumption is that if the best interests of the entire community are in the forefront, then everybody who lives within that community will benefit from that. That's the Mayflower Compact. That's the idea of political community. That's the origin within the New World, the idea of consent of the governed, and the idea that government derives its authority to make rules and laws and enforce them because of the idea of consent of the governed. The only way that you can expect people to obey the law is when you can show that they have consented to do that. I would suggest to you, when you vote, you are reaffirming your consent to be governed by the result. That principle never wavers. We have reached the top of our first hour. It's 1 minute after the hour. We will pause and take a 5-minute break, and we will be back with our second hour here at the Virtual Center. I'm Bill O'Brien. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome back to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I am Bill O'Brien, and if you are just joining us, welcome to today's program. If you've been with us since the top of our program 1 hour ago, we thank you for staying with us. That, as you know, as I've said many times, means a lot. If you joined us the better part of an hour ago and you're still here, then that suggests that something positive is happening. And that's the goal, that's the idea of this whole enterprise. So I thank you for that. I appreciate you staying with us. I welcome those of you who have just joined us. Our phone number, area code 304-658-3333. If you pick up the phone and dial those numbers, you will be in our studio and we'll get you on the air momentarily. 304-658-3333. If you would like to email me directly and privately, by all means, feel free to do that. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien, BRIEN, 906@gmail.com. Today, if you've just joining us today, we've been considering and looking at the whole idea of the public interest and community. And specifically, we've been looking at the origins of political community here in American history. And in our first hour, we looked at the very famous Mayflower Compact. And I know many of you have heard that from grade school. Most of the time, we've heard it in a textbook. And what that means is whoever wrote the textbook told us what the Mayflower Compact was and what it said. It could be that it told the story very well. It could also be that the story wasn't told as effectively and as completely as it could. However, what I ask you to think about is the difference between a definition of the Mayflower Compact as written in a textbook or as delivered in a lecture by an instructor, by a professor. The difference between that and actually reading the document for yourself. There is so much more to be understood and grasped by reading the document. I would suggest to you that when you do that, when you embrace the entire document, you have effectively engaged the source. And I emphasize the word engaged. When you read a textbook, rarely do you engage anything, because it is alien information to you being presented to you from somebody else. The person who wrote it, theoretically at least, read the Mayflower Compact and knows what it says. But whether in fact they've effectively been able to demonstrate that to you, the reader, is an unanswered question. But the fact of the matter is, you don't have anything to engage except what somebody tells you is true. That's the difference between engaging the sources and trusting on a textbook or an author or a curriculum guide or a state board of education or somebody else to tell us what we should know. There's no opportunity to engage the evidence because all we're being given are the conclusions, the answers. We are being asked to accept an interpretation that is being given to us by somebody else. We have been being asked to embrace it as truth because somebody said it was true. It appeared in the book, the textbook, or whatever. When you read this document, however, you begin to realize that there's so much more in it than one can possibly convey in a textbook. The pledging of total fealty and submission and loyalty to the king, the affirmation of loyalty to the country, a commitment to enhance the Word of God, a part of a mission to expand the Christian faith. The fact that these people are a couple of thousand miles away from their home country and their home church. They have effectively separated from their church. But they can't communicate that. They can't say that because their independence as a community, as a godly or religious community, demands that they be seen as loyal citizens to their king, to their country, to their church, and to their God. So they must affirm that over and over again in order to remain independent and in order for their mission to have a chance to be successful. In this idea, you come across the word covenant. These people covenant. They sign a document. They affix their names to a document, and they all agree in the document that the laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers of the government they create can expect their full obedience because they have consented to be governed. They have created the institutions which make the laws, and they agree to live according to the rules articulated in those laws and to the decisions of the officers appointed to enforce those laws. I would suggest to you that this short little document explains more about the American political system, about the nature of the republic, the nature of representative government, the idea of consent of the governed, the idea that government receives its power from the consent of the governed, all of the things that we have beaten over our kids' heads for years and years and years about American government. You could accomplish the same thing in this little document, and kids could really understand it. They could engage it. They could embrace it. You wouldn't have to tell them these things because they would see it. They would understand it. The value of primary sources and the value of reading critically. In that same vein, in 1633, now this is 3 years after the Boston group has settled in the city of Boston. This is the group of Puritans that come on the Arbella under the tutelage, if you will, of Governor John Winthrop. A group of the main group that they land in 1630. 3 years later, in October of 1633, an entire community splits off from the main group in Boston and sets up its own church in Dorchester, which is south of Boston. And the one thing we can appreciate from the first document, from the Mayflower Compact, and it becomes clearer even here, is that these people settle in communities. They are godly people. They are on a religious mission. Their community is their church. And so they travel not as individuals, but as congregations, as a church. In other words, each community has its own church. So the whole model of New England government, if any of you are familiar or have ever traveled, driven through New England, you know that the political unit of New England government, of Massachusetts government, but also Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, etc., is town government. If you've ever driven through Connecticut, if you get off the turnpike and you come across one town after another, they all tend to be structured the same way. They all tend to be built around a central church. And if you go to some of the most famous towns in Massachusetts, Concord, Lexington, Woburn, Newton, on and on and on, the town center is built around a church. The whole community revolves around church. These are God-fearing church groups that come here. And the idea is they exist as communities, not as individuals, but as communities. And so the entire political structure, the whole idea of the New England town meeting, for example, is based on this principle, that the people of the community must come together, discuss and understand and agree to, consent to be governed by the particular rules and regulations under scrutiny. So a congregation splits away from the Boston church and sets up camp, so to speak, in Dorchester, which is about 12 miles south of Boston. And so the members of that community, of that church, agree to set up their own covenant, very similar to the Mayflower Compact. The Dorchester Agreement is an agreement made by the whole consent and vote of the plantation, made on Monday, the 8th of October, 1633. So on the 8th of October, which was a Monday, in 1633, the community of Dorchester was created by agreement of the consent of the members of that particular group, or they call themselves plantation. And here's what the Dorchester Agreement says. And again, if you type in on your computer or on Google, Dorchester Agreement 1633, you will have a copy of this particular document. And this is what the document says. It opens with a Latin citation, in primis. It is ordered that for the general good and well-ordering of the affairs of the plantation, notice again, community, it is ordered that for the general good and well-ordering of the affairs of the plantation, the entire group, there shall be every Monday before the court by 8 of the clock in the morning, and presently upon the beating of the drum, a general meeting of the inhabitants of the plantation at the meeting house, there to settle and set down such orders as may tend to the general good as aforesaid. Period. What are they saying? Every Monday morning before 8 o'clock in the morning, a drum will beat. And that drum is the call for all the members of the community to come to the meeting house, which is the church. And there, everybody to settle and set down such orders as may tend to the general good. This group will make the rules that will govern the community. and every man to be bound thereby, without gainsaying or resistance. Once the community makes the rules, everybody will obey it without resistance, or without gainsaying, which means without complaining or whining. If the community consents to a particular law, then the individual has no recourse except to obey it. Next sentence. It is also agreed that there shall be 12 men selected out of the company that may, or the greatest part of them, meet as aforesaid, to determine as aforesaid. Yet so as it is desired that the most of the plantation will keep the meeting constantly, and all that are there, although none of the 12, shall have a free voice as any of the 12, and that the greater vote, both of the 12 and the other, shall be of force and efficacy as aforesaid. Very difficult English. This speaks volumes as to why we have got to teach our kids how to read. The spelling of these words is all Old English, but if you sound them out, you can recognize them. But you got to read it. What are they saying? They are saying that every Monday morning before 8, every member of the community will come to the meeting house to make the rules. But then they are saying something else. They are agreeing that they will select 12 men from the group, 12 representatives of the community, that will meet on a regular basis as aforesaid and determine as aforesaid. In other words, the entire group only meets every Monday morning before 8 o'clock. But the 12 can meet any time between that and the next time that the community meets. And basically what they are struggling with here is language which basically says that the greatest part of them, in other words, the majority of the 12, will make the rules in the interim. So what we're seeing here is the birth of representative government. The fact that the representatives are chosen by all the people to represent their best interests when they can't be there. But notice, when all the people come back the next Monday morning and reconvene, then one of the things they will have before them is what the 12 have done during the interim. So the people of the community will have a shot at determining whether, in fact, their chosen representatives are really representing their interests. So even though the 12 are appointed, the 12 are not independent decision makers. They are merely there to enact the will of the community when the community isn't present. But they will answer regularly to the community. That's the whole principle of representative government in a republic, as identified by Montesquieu. A republic has to be small so that the people know the representatives and the representatives know the people. The representatives have to know what the people would want if they were there. The people, when they do come back together again, have the right to hold the representatives accountable for what they did, and presumably throw them out of office if they didn't follow the will of the people, and continue to support them if they did. But power does not leave the group. Power does not shift from the members of the community to the 12. This is merely, as they say, a matter of convenience. And this group, or the majority of this group, will make the rules, and they shall be in force provided they are consistent with the mission and the will of the community as a whole. And then it says the following, and it is likewise ordered that all things concluded as aforesaid shall stand in force and be obeyed until the next monthly meeting and awards and afterwards, if it be not contradicted and otherwise ordered upon the said monthly meeting by the greatest part of those that are present as aforesaid. When the main group, the entire community, comes back together, it as a group, as a civil body politic, it will have a right to affirm what the 12 have decided or to countermand what the 12 have decided if it is not the best of the will of the people, if it is not the public interest as defined by the people themselves. So basically, because the group meets regularly, the 12 never get out of the sight, if you will, of those they represent. Therefore, the will of the people remains supreme. This is the republic that is defined by and justified by Montesquieu. It is the republic that Madison changes in Federalist Number 10 and Federalist 51. The Constitution of the United States changes the definition of republic principally by shifting power from the members of the community as a whole to the representatives that they elect, in this case the 12. That's the major change that the Constitution creates from the Confederation governments that existed before. So you can see it. You can see it right in this document. So what they say is, it is likewise ordered that everything done will stand in force and will be obeyed until the next meeting, and afterwards, unless it's contradicted and the people change it. And then finally, the last sentence of the Dorchester Agreement says, moreover, because the court in winter in the vacancy of the said, this said meeting to continue till the first Monday in the month, Mr. Johnston, Mr. Plummery, Mr. Richards, Mr. Pierce, George Hull, William Phelps, Thomas Afford. So basically, what you see is that the people affix their names to this document. The document stays in force until the people come back together again and agree to change it or to leave it as is. I would suggest to you that those two documents together do more to give us a grasp, to really allow us to get our arms around the concept of community, the idea of a republic, the idea of representative government, the idea of consent of the governed, the relationship between citizens and their elected representatives, better than any government course or political science course or civic education course or any textbook or whatever. If students read these two documents and really read them and understood them and picked them apart, in other words, read them critically, we would not have students failing courses in American government. If you think about it, what nation in the history of the world has its own young people fail courses when asked to explain how their government works? It's unbelievable. And I would suggest this is the answer. And that leaves us, I think, with the big Megillah, which is John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill speech, delivered on the Arbella in 1630, as the Puritan settlers are about to embark from their ships and set up camp in what becomes the city of Boston. 1630. This is 10 years after the Puritans, after the Pilgrims. So it's 10 years after the Mayflower Compact. This is a totally different group. And what historians have recognized is this group, unlike the Pilgrims, are much more committed to the idea that they are loyal citizens and loyal subjects of the King and of the Church of England than were the Pilgrims. Usually, this group is identified as non-separatists in order to distinguish them from the Pilgrims, who are classified usually by most historians as separatists. But that's a technicality that we don't really need to deal with at this point. Let's listen to John Winthrop's speech, because I think this is one of the most important documents ever written, for reasons that we'll talk about after we get through it. So let me begin. John Winthrop says, "Now the only way to avoid this shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. For this end, we must be knit together in this work as one man." In the copy I have, I bolded this, and it's in red. For this end, we must be knit together in this work as one man. A community is just that. It is a living organism. It is a living, breathing thing where no member of it is as important as the whole. So what Winthrop is telling these settlers on the Arbella, there are 1,000 of them who come with the initial group, that in order to avoid a shipwreck, in order to avoid disaster, what we must do is agree to behave justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. To this end, we must knit ourselves together in this work as one man. And then he goes on and elaborates this. The elaboration is very important. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities. Notice, we must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities. We have to be willing to give up what we don't need, that which is superfluous, when in fact it becomes a necessary need of somebody else. We must be willing to do that. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. By commerce together, it means we must interact together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must be patient. We must be considerate. We must be sensitive to each other. We must be sensitive to each other's needs. He goes on, we must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body, so shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. If you ever needed to know what a community requires, John Winthrop is telling you. You must be knit together as if we are one person. We must interact with each other with respect and gentleness and kindness and patience. We must be willing to take what we don't need in order to provide for our fellow man what they do need. We must delight in each other. We must make others' conditions our own. In other words, we must make an effort to walk in others' shoes. We must know what their pain is if we are going to be sensitive to it and do anything for it. We must rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work. Our commission, our charge, our mission, our special reason for being here. As community, as members of the same body, so shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The Lord will be our God and delight to dwell among us as his own people, and will command a blessing upon us in all our ways, so that we shall see much more of his wisdom, power, goodness, and truth than formerly we have been acquainted with. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies, when he shall make us a praise and glory, that men shall say of exceeding plantations, the Lord make it like that of New England. There is the mission. What you see in this speech of John Winthrop is the idea of community, what it involves, what it must have. It's not artificial, it's not pretend. Notice, there's nothing in here that suggests tolerance. There's everything in here that suggests direct sensitivity and experience, feeling. You don't just tolerate other people, you love them. You are sensitive to them. You celebrate with them. You hurt with them. You work with them. You interact with them in a spirit of meekness and gentleness and patience and liberality. You are more than willing to give up what you don't need in order to provide what others do need. And only if we do that, says Winthrop, can we avoid the shipwreck? Can we avoid disaster? This is our mission. This is what our community is about. This is what God wants us to do. We shall keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The Lord will be our God and dwell among us as his own people, and will command a blessing upon us in all our ways. So we shall see much more of his wisdom, power, goodness, and truth than formerly we have been acquainted with. If we do this, this is the covenant. A covenant is a contract. I would suggest to you that a covenant, like a contract, has contingency clauses. If we do this, this will be the result. But if we do something else, the result will be something else. So what Winthrop is saying is, if we follow the commission, if we remain a community, if we genuinely embrace each other, the Lord will be our God. His blessings will rain down upon us, and we will know more of his wisdom and power and goodness and truth than we ever knew before. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies. When those who follow us in succeeding plantations will be able to say, the Lord make it like that of New England. We will be the perfect community. We will be living the commission that God gave us. And here's the line that defines the speech. When he shall, for we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill, The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. We shall open the mouths of enemies to speak evil of the ways of God, and all professors for God's sake. There's the covenant. If we do what we're supposed to do, we will know the wisdom and the power and the glory of God like we never knew it before. But if we don't, then we will pay. God's enemies will thrive. We will open the mouths of enemies to speak evil of the ways of God. We will do a disservice to our God. And we will not experience the wisdom and the power and the goodness and the truths and the niceties that we would have experienced if we obeyed the covenant. So the idea of a covenant or a contract, when you sign a contract to buy a refrigerator from Sears, you agree to pay X dollars per month until the thing is paid for. But if you don't, then this is what will happen to you. The whole idea of operating according to contract. The belief here, the theology here suggests that God functions by contract. That makes the most sense. That's the most logical. These people believe that the God they know through Scripture functions by contract, makes deals with his people. If you do this, you'll achieve this. If you don't do this but do that, you will experience something else. They believe, and their sermons reinforce the fact, if you read their sermons, that this is the way, most likely, that God functions. This is the way God functions with his chosen people. If you read the sermons, and I'm into a little bit of scripture here, and I can't go too far. I don't want to get out of my element here. But these Puritans, if you read the sermons, they believe that God, in his initial love for man, created a contract with Abraham. A covenant. God created a covenant with Abraham. And in return for that, the Jews were God's chosen people. But then God's chosen people rejected the Son of God. And as a result of that rejection, man was stained forever with the stain of original sin. The idea is that man could not do what's right because within him was the stain of violating God's contract, violating the covenant that God gave to Abraham and the Jews as his chosen people. But these people believe that God so loved mankind that he gave man another chance. He sent his Son to be crucified for man's sins. And these people believe that they are God's second chosen people. They believe the commission that Winthrop talks about. They believe that they have been commissioned by God to set sail for the new world and to set up the ideal community as God wants them to do it, and as Scripture teaches them how to do it. And Winthrop is letting these people know that if we follow the covenant, if we stick to our commission and we do what God wants us to do, we will flourish. But if we don't, then the wrath of God will be upon us. The enemies of God will flourish, and we will be penalized accordingly. That's the covenant. Winthrop goes on and says, "We shall shame the faces of many of God's worthy servants and cause their prayers to be turned into curses upon us till we be consumed out of the good land whither we are going." God created this place for us to set up his ideal community. If we do not abide by the covenant, we shall shame the faces of God's worthy servants. We will turn prayers into curses, and God will not allow us to enjoy the fruits and the benefits of the good land where we are going, which God has created for us. And then Winthrop says, and now he's bringing this to a conclusion, and he says what many of us would love to say when we hear about a conclusion. Winthrop says, "And to shut up this discourse," to end it, "with the exhortation of Moses, that faithful servant of the Lord, in his last farewell to Israel," Deuteronomy 30. "Beloved, there is now set before us life and good, death and evil, in that we are commanded this day to love the Lord our God, and to love one another, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, and his ordinance, and his laws, and the articles of our covenant with him, that we may live and be multiplied, and that the Lord our God may bless us in the land whither we go to possess it. But if our hearts shall turn away, so that we will not obey, but shall be seduced and worship other gods, our pleasures, and prophets, and serve them, it is propounded unto us this day, we shall surely perish out of the good land, whether we pass over this vast sea to possess it." Winthrop is redefining the covenant. If we do what we're supposed to do, we'll flourish. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, we will suffer. They believe that this is the way God works. They believe the most sensible, logical way that God could work is according to the idea of covenants or contracts. You get rewarded for doing what you should do. You get punished for doing things you shouldn't do. That makes the most sense to them. And then Winthrop ends with the following verse. And I'll read it very quickly, and then we'll bring this to hopefully to a meaningful conclusion. "Therefore," Winthrop says, "let us choose life, that we and our seed, future generations, may live, by obeying his voice and cleaving to him, for he is our life and our prosperity." So we are on a mission. We have been selected by God to set up the ideal community according to the will of God. And if we do it and we live according to the covenant, we will flourish. If we do not, we will perish. Our future generations will suffer. And how does Winthrop define not abiding by the covenant? If we allow if we do not obey, but are seduced and worship other gods, I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not have strange gods before me. What are the strange gods Winthrop talks about? Our pleasures, our profits. If we give in to them, if we serve them, we shall surely perish out of this land. This document, more than any other, is the basis for those who argue in favor of what is called American exceptionalism. The fact that America is a special people with a special mission to reform the world. This is where they get it. I would suggest to you, however, that this is a people who are united into community by a common set of beliefs and religious principles. These people are a religious community. The link between religion and government is solid. This is what the history books, what the textbooks call a theocracy, where government and politics are one. They are united. However, the only way that this can work is as long as everybody subscribes to the same religious principles. As long as everybody believes in the covenant. As long as everybody subscribes to the mission. As long as everybody believes that the rules being made for the community are God's rules made by people whose wisdom and insight gives them the ability to know what God would want and share it with us. As long as people subscribe to that, community remains community. And the covenant remains solid. However, Winthrop points out what can destroy all of this. It's our own self-interest, our own pleasures, our own profits. When we allow our self-interest to become more important than the public interest, God will punish us. The contradiction that we all have to confront here in wrapping this up and getting our arms around it is, how do you maintain community? How do you maintain the elements of community as Winthrop describes them within an economic framework where Madison and the founders have put the emphasis on individual freedom and private property? The very things that Winthrop identified as the things that would destroy community. Do you see the contradiction? Do you see the challenge here? How do you maintain government? How do you maintain community and still endorse or support individual freedom and private property? Do you do it by allowing the freedom of the individual to take precedence over everything else? Do you do it by demeaning the community? Since the rules of the community limit individual freedom and emphasize public responsibility over individual freedom, do you maintain community by giving in to the individual freedom which potentially destroys the community? Or do you give community its head, so to speak? Do you make individual freedom and private property the be-all and end-all of your experience? If you do that, do you lose community? And this is the challenge that I would suggest to you the founders confronted in drafting the Constitution of the United States. And I would suggest to you that not only has contemporary America made the decision, but we even chose to so demean community that we have taken the word communism, community, the extreme of community, which is communism, and we have made that word anathema to the English language. Because we have put so much emphasis on individual freedom and private property that we see government's necessity of maintaining community and ruling in the public interest as a direct threat to individualism and to freedom and to private property. Thus, we have the role of the court in trying to find and strike the proper balance between the benefits of to the entire community on the one hand and the freedom of the individual and their right to private property on the other. That is the challenge. That is the issue. I would suggest to you, we only have a couple of minutes left in our program today. I would suggest to you that these three documents, the Mayflower Compact, the Dorchester Agreement, and John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill speech, together, probably give us as much depth and understanding about the nature of community and the threats to it as any number of lectures or textbooks or curriculum guides or whatever you wanted to call it could possibly provide. Those who would claim American exceptionalism are cherry-picking. They are taking John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill speech out of context, because we are not all part of the same community. We are not all part of the same religious experience. We have a diverse society comprised of a number of different religious groups and a number of people who do not subscribe to any religious group. How do you maintain community? How do you define the public interest in the face of that kind of diversity? I would suggest to you the only way you can do it is to separate church from state. For Winthrop, church is what made the state function. But in a diverse society, religion potentially destroys community. Therefore, you have to separate the two. The greatest danger to this nation are those who would deny the realities of the American society and the American experience and would choose to artificially fashion a religious community by suggesting a link between church and state that is not there and that cannot be there if the public interest is going to drive decision-making in this society. James Madison himself, the author of the Constitution of the United States, co-authored with Thomas Jefferson the 1786 legislation in Virginia separating church and state. The Ordinance for Religious Freedom in Virginia, 1786. The author of the Constitution himself. The only way that you can maintain the illusion of the public interest in a diverse society is to separate church and state. Winthrop was dealing in a context where church and state were one. And to make sure of it, they hung Quakers and they expelled Ann Hutchinson and Roger Williams. They expelled dissenters because the key was the whole, not the individuals that made up the whole. I would suggest to you We are defying history by arguing for the contemporary views which feed American exceptionalism. We have 1 minute before the top of the hour. It's 59 minutes after. I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to let Bob Kincaid take over. Bob, it's yours. Thank you so very, very much for listening. Tune in again. We will be back tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon Eastern Time. Our program will be from 2 to 4. Thank you very much. I'm Bill O'Brien. Be safe.